Hey guys, how are you? And I'd like to introduce Angus, and he is an engineer. Well, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Darian. I'm a coastal engineer with over 50 years experience working on projects in all states of Australia and overseas in Brunei, Dubai, Kuwait, Hong Kong, New Zealand and Indonesia.
Yep.
And a lot of those projects have involved breakwaters. I've also been in New South Wales. I've been involved one way or another in looking at the all of the 70 breakwaters of the same nature as the one at Port Macquarie.
Okay, and you also set up a coastal program as well?
Yes, I was involved in setting up the New South Wales beach improvement program, but then I was also asked to join in when the 1979 Act was being put together, the Coastal Protection Act, and more recently I was put on the expert committee advising the Minister on the new 2016 Coastal Management Act.
Righto, so you've got a pretty good resume.
It's not too bad after 50 years.
Alright, well look, I'm going to move the camera so you can focus on Angus and not myself. So I'll just...
There seems to be an assumption in some of this work that is not, in my experience, correct, and that is that these breakwaters, this type of breakwater, for example, fails underwater. In actual fact, they tend to fail around about mid-tide level and above.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is that area is where and I say this from not just looking at a lot of breakwaters, but also doing a lot of testing of breakwater structures in model testing in flumes at Manly Lab, for example. And at the
what was your position at Manly Lab?
I was in charge of the laboratory.
Manly Laboratory.
Yeah. I was the manager of Manly Laboratory. And prior to that, I worked at the Water Research Laboratory at the University of New South Wales as well. So, and my actual thesis involved looking at breakwaters and the behaviour of breakwaters, and involved a very large number of tests carried out in flumes looking at this.
Because I was told by the engineer on Royal Haskayne that, because I said to him, look, the Manly Hydraulics report came out with a 5 out of 6 for the top of the breakwall, and he said to me, well, you didn't see the multi-beam survey that was done underneath the breakwall, and that's where all the problems were. That's why I dived it, and when I dived it, I still didn't see it. So they're kind of like, they're basically saying, well, you know, what was underneath the water was where the issues were. But in your experience, it kind of doesn't.
That would be most unusual. My experience is that the failures, as I say, occur from about mean water level above, and those failures result in material moving down the slope to the underwater area.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because rocks don't float.
No, not particularly well, no. From the coastal management point of view, and I haven't inspected this breakwater recently, so that has to be borne in mind, because one has to be careful unless you've looked at it recently. But the question I'd ask, and particularly looking at this older report from Manly Hydraulics Laboratory, is I don't see anything detailing whether or not what's there at the present time couldn't be repaired as against upgraded.
Yep. So that's what you do with the other breakwaters, isn't it?
That's correct. In fact, there's a long history of repair.
What you're saying is, if you, for instance, if you were to walk along the breakwall and inspect it, and you saw a hole, or you had a look at it, and your expertise, and you just put rocks in holes where you see it.
That's correct, and that's the way repairs have been done over the years. So unfortunately, I think what strikes me with all of this is nobody's actually gone back to basics and had a look at the potential conflict between community culture and engineering structures. They haven't gone back and looked at what safety means. They haven't looked at what the history has shown as to how the breakwater behaves, and they haven't gone back and looked at the driving mechanisms of Treasury funding, for example, which is an underlier that most people mightn't have realised. is there. And of course, they also haven't gone back and looked at what some of the politicians may be doing, which is being advised by people that have only looked at narrow issues in regards to this.
Yeah, or one way of doing it.
One way of doing it rather than... And doing it, as I said, as much as these are engineering structures, when they get the cultural significance that this has got, these are coastal management issues. Very big difference between repairing a structure, particularly a structure like this, and upgrading it. And I think that's the major difference between the two reports that are now out for the 2021 Manly Hydraulics report, which really was a report where they were asked by Transport for New South Wales to assess whether or not the floods and storm actions, particularly during that 2019 through to 2021, whether there had been any adverse impacts on the breakwaters, particularly the southern breakwater. They came out and covered both the north and the southern breakwater, pointed to quite a number of issues on the northern breakwater, but on the southern breakwater said generally it hadn't suffered particularly. But see, this was them assessing whether or not repairs were necessary following those particular storms, which is what they were asked for. The Haskelling's report, on the other hand, has really worked from a different viewpoint, where it would seem they have been asked to what needs to be done to upgrade the breakwater. Now, there's a major difference between repair and upgrade. Upgrading, if you can carry out repairs with relatively minor impacts on everything around. You're really just talking about filling holes and putting a few rocks in here or raising some crest areas or whatever. Whereas if you were talking about upgrading, you're talking about taking the breakwater from one condition into a different condition, and you're talking about more major works. The result being that you can carry out, for example, minor repairs, without necessarily disturbing the crest or the trees or anything like that. Whereas
or the culture,
or the culture.
Can I ask you one other question? In your experience, if Manly Hydraulics did a survey, and they did the flood survey, for instance, and it came out with a 5 out of 6, which is a really good rating. I spoke to the engineer about that. Is it unusual to then have another company go in and do another survey a year later?
It is unusual for that to happen, but having said that, it seems to me that the problem is that Transport for New South Wales has turned to Haskelling's and said, what will it take to upgrade this? Now, there's a big difference, as I said, between repair and upgrade. Upgrading is far more extensive.
Vital infrastructure to ensure that our community is kept safe. I don't want to see that, get into a position where it could collapse.
These sort of breakwaters, interestingly enough, do not suffer catastrophic collapse. And as I say, we have 70 breakwaters.
We have heard that from our local member that she doesn't want the breakwater to collapse and put the community at risk and stuff.
And to my mind, that's understandable based on the advice that she's probably been getting. And I think it's important always to understand that people who are in that sort of position, when they're representatives, they're not necessarily experts in every field, and so therefore they have to rely on advice. It's not a question of just catastrophic collapse or whatever. It's a case of people understanding that these are flexible structures that move around and that are built out of rocks. And over time, they get hit by waves and they progressively fail and just need topping up. And that's been the case with this breakwater, at least for close to, at least 50 years and close to 100 years that's been the case.